Hello! Hey, hi. I hope everyone is well on this fine Wednesday. I myself woke up like an hour ago, so I'm a little groggy, but I am excited for today's stream because I get to gush about stuff. Hi! Good to see you again. So today is gonna be a little different because I wanted to do another sort of discussion and ranking of such. The last time I did this was, I think, back on the SCP stream, which is it's been a minute. It's been a minute. But anyway, I just wanted to like nerd out about something because I like talking about fun stuff, especially video games, because you know it's a passion of mine. So it came out that I had to go through my backlog of like what would be good to discuss and what's something that I played every single game of and I know what I'm talking about at least to a degree. And I landed on Devil May Cry. So if you have never heard of Devil May Cry, which please go play the games. If you've never heard of Devil May Cry, they're essentially character action games, which means they are like an action-based sort of. It's hard to describe in just a few words, but they're like hack and slash, where the entire game is led by how involved the characters are. In a sense, like another game that's really popular that is a character action game is Bayonetta. So you get sort of the idea of where everything's coming from. But yeah, the point of today is going to be definitely talking about just all of the Devil May Cry games, and discussing like where they stand against each other. Again, because video games are subjective, entertainment is subjective, and everything is subjective, obviously. We're all different. We all have different opinions. This list is going to be based on my personal experiences with all the games. Each game I have played through in its entirety at least twice, I think. Yeah, I think about twice. A couple of them I played 3 or more times, but every single one I think I've played around twice. Depending on how long it's taken and depending on when I played it, determine how much I enjoyed it. Like, if I played it when I was younger, I probably enjoyed it more than when I played it when I was older, because I'm more critical as an adult. But I will discuss, like, my personal experiences with each game. We're going to talk about what is good about each game, what is bad about each game, because there's bad stuff even with the good ones. Everything has flaws. And it's just generally going to be a good time where I get to nerd out about a fun game series. So let's you know what? Let's just hop straight into it. All right, so today we are on Tier Maker. Last time I actually made a tier list myself, which was a mistake, because setting everything up was a little annoying. But this time we're on Tier Maker, and I made a tier list using all the games down below. We have a ranking here on the left, from 1 to 6, because there are 6 total games. I am counting DMC Devil May Cry as part of the series. If you had seen the thumbnail for the screen. Dante is there. Dante from DMC is there. He's just hidden behind the cooler Dantes. But I would consider it part of the main line. So it has relevance. It's there. And they go in order. So at the bottom is number 6, which is the weakest, and then as we go up, the games get better and better. I'd say the quality line is probably around 3 to 4. So games at or below 4 are definitely not as good as games like 3 or above. It's not that they're terrible games. Like every single one of these games has some great points and is a good time to play through. But there are definitely more weak parts than strong parts, where the ones 1, 2, and 3 are much, much stronger throughout the experience. So I have set up some background music for this, so give me 1 second to adjust that to make sure everything's okay. If you hear a sudden burst of loud noise, it's because I'm adjusting it in the background. Okay, good. Yes. So we're going to start from the very bottom. And for each game, I'm going to give you kind of a rundown of like what happens in them, why they're placed there, and generally my feelings on them. So I have no notes for this. This is completely off the cuff, and it's just based on what I remember about each of them. So if I get anything wrong, it's because it's been a little bit, but it should be enjoyable, and we should have a good time just discussing some great games, some great action games. So to start off, in the very bottom slot, and it is such a disappointment to put it so low, but you really can't make the argument. It's Devil May Cry 2. So Devil May Cry 2 is the very first sequel to the now critically acclaimed Devil May Cry 1, the very first one in the series. And the issue... yeah, no way. Oh, no, it's so predictable. But yeah, Devil May Cry 2 is definitely the weakest by and large. To give you a rundown of what happens in Devil May Cry 2 before we get into the pros and cons, it is set on the Isle of Via de Marly, and it is the only game in the series... No, it's actually not, because there are now 3 games where you play multiple characters, but it was the first one where you have the choice between 2 different characters. It's strange because it's set on 2 different discs, where you play as Dante on one disc and you play as Lucia on the other disc. And both games are actually pretty much the same. Like, they're actually the same game, just reordered with slightly different bosses. And yeah, Devil May Cry 2 is a weird one. It's considered the black sheep of the whole series because of how much it stands out from the rest. But in essence, you are still Dante. It's still the main man, but he's got a little less sass. Like, the thing about Dante from the Devil May Cry series is that he is a very charismatic fellow. He has a lot of charisma, a lot of talking points, a huge amount of sass, constantly throws jokes and mocks his opponents and all that stuff. But in Devil May Cry 2, he loses a bit of that. He's like almost dark and brooding in a way, and it kind of makes it slightly boring. Not to say that it's not still Dante. It is still Dante. He just feels a little bit out of character. And Lucia, genuinely, in my opinion, is a good character. She's well written. She has a good backstory, and in relation to the main villain of the game, she holds her own. It's just the fact that she's, the side character to Dante in the sequel to the game where it was just Dante feels a little, I don't know. It feels like she was placed in a game that made everything slightly worse, where if she was in a standalone game or in one of the sequels, it would have been way better received. Anyway, the main reason that Devil May Cry 2 sits so low on so many people's rosters is because while every other game is entirely reliant on action, like comboing between different weapon types, moving around, keeping a good eye on the scenario around you, and just generally being good at swapping between stuff and juggling and, having a high skill gap. Devil May Cry 2 said, you know all that skill, you know all that genuine ability to fight. Let's just completely ignore that and make your pistols do so much damage that if you don't use them, you are essentially handicapping yourself. So, every single fight in Devil May Cry 2 boils down to this. Lock onto a target, even if they're off screen, pull out Ebony and Ivory, and just start shooting. Eventually, everything on screen will die. And if they don't die, keep shooting. You have infinite bullets, and the bullets do so much damage that it doesn't matter. Everything will eventually die. So, to put it in a way that makes sense, the game ends up being really, really boring. Extremely boring. And it's such a shame, too, because the setting and the character designs, especially Dante's outfit is one of the most standout parts of DMC 2. He is so fashionable in DMC 2, it's kind of amazing. But everything just falls to the wayside because the gameplay is so obnoxiously boring. There is no nuance to it. It feels like wasted potential, and after having such a wonderful game in the original Devil May Cry, having that be followed up by gun shoot simulator, it was definitely a letdown, and a lot of people at the time were very underwhelmed, and a lot of people even today are very underwhelmed. Now, I'm not saying it is a completely horrible, completely terrible game. It can be fun, and you can have some good times with it. There are some good boss fights, there are some good boss designs, and generally, it is an open and shut case of, being actually a video game. And like I said, it's on 2 discs, so if you don't like how one story goes, you can play the other story, and they eventually, pseudo meet up at the end. But comparing the quality of Devil May Cry 2 to Devil May Cry 1 and all the sequels and DMC, it just doesn't hold up. It's not even close. They essentially stripped back everything that makes Devil May Cry what it is and gave you 2 handguns and said, go wild. And that's the entire game. So it definitely goes at the bottom. It goes in the Guns Go Burr tier. That is where DMC 2 will lie and is buried. Personally, I played this one only about twice. And I actually played it back when it released on PS2. And I don't regret playing it. I'll never say I regret playing certain games, but I definitely wish it was better. I definitely wish it was a lot better. If someone asked me to play Devil May Cry 2 again, I wouldn't say no, but I would definitely be not super happy with the experience for sure. So yeah, that's the sort of rundown with Devil May Cry 2. And the music will now stop as we move on to the next one. So, to go into number 5, which is better than Devil May Cry 2, but not by much, is DMC Devil May Cry. So, story time. When I was younger, back in 2013, I remember walking into GameStop while I still was playing on Xbox 360 at the time. That was my main console of choice. And I had seen DMC Devil May Cry on the shop shelves. And I asked, because I think I was shopping with my mom at the time, I asked her if I could buy the game. And she looked, and we looked at the case, and we looked at the back, because I had played the previous games. I'd played 1, 2, 3 up to this point, and I think I had played 4 as well. But we had looked at the case, and the only reason that I don't think I bought it that day was because it was rated, I believe it was rated not rated R. What's the game rating? It's 18 plus. It's an adult game. I don't remember the exact rating off the top of my head, but I was young. I was too young at the time, and I was not allowed to play mature games. I actually got in trouble for playing God of War when I wasn't even a teenager yet. The original God of War 1, at a friend's house because booba. So yeah, not not the best decision. And from then on, my parents were much more strict about adult content in video games because they were aware of the fact that it existed. But back in 2013, when DMC released, I didn't buy it at the time, and I never got to play it. And honestly, I'm very, very glad that we didn't pick up the game that day, because the difference between the original release and the definitive edition that came out, I think, 2 years later is like night and day. So, DMC Devil May Cry is the only game in the series to be set in a completely different universe. It is, I wouldn't say a soft reboot. It's definitely more of a hard reboot because all of the characters are different. The setting is completely different. It's set in Limbo City, which, you know, that's okay. But it takes a lot of the fun story beats and a lot of the coolness that the original Devil May Cry series had and just kind of throws it out the window, where the story is so unsubtle and so dated that it tarnishes the rest of the game. It really does. The Dante in DMC, or as a lot of people like to say, Dante, because he's not Dante, he really is not Dante, is this edgy, sex-crazed, like, he's just a punk. He's a complete punk. And instead of being mocking or sassy, he's just angry all the time. Like, for instance, if you see any clips of DMC, watch the introductory cutscene for the Succubus fight, which is the music that's playing right now. And in that fight, he essentially talks, he talks to the Succubus, which horrible design. I don't know who designed that boss. And it just boils down to two idiots just swearing at each other until the fight starts. Like, we go from sassy cracking jokes and mocking bosses to like a general forum discussion. It's not fun. It really is not. And the worst part about it is when they remade it for Definitive Edition after getting a massive amount of criticism, the actual gameplay is not bad. It really is not bad. Like, compared to DMC 2, which is just gun shoot simulator, they made some severe improvements. They really did. It actually has character action elements. It's a full-on hack and slash. There's weapon combos. You can throw guns in there. You can throw abilities in there. There's a combo system that actually makes sense. Enemy types have really interesting ways of guarding. And, you know, you can actually juggle things. They actually did it pretty decently. It's not bad. The gameplay is genuinely good. The only thing that sucks is the elemental guard, or whatever you want to call it, where different enemy types are resistant to certain weapons until you switch to the respective weapon, which is, you know, it's annoying. It's really, really annoying. But that aside, the gameplay is actually much better after the Definitive Edition. But to go back to the whole criticism on the game not being good. So unlike the rest of the games of the series, DMC was developed by Ninja Theory instead of Capcom directly. And back in 2013, before the game launched, they got into a huge amount of controversy because they did their good old our game and our character is better, your game is bad and is for pansies. And no one really was on their side. So not only did they lambast the previous games for being, for lack of a better term, wimpy, they hyped up their own video game in a way that felt terrible. It just felt completely unearned. So already the reputation was set pretty mediocre, and then the game came out and it was not what anyone wanted, so that dropped it even further. When they remastered it, they improved a lot of things that people were complaining about, but still, it's like getting your game out of that miasma of, yeah, you created this problem. It was definitely not easy, and it definitely did no favors to the game. Comparatively, DMC is better than Devil May Cry 2. because while Devil May Cry 2 is still set in the Devil May Cry universe, it features Dante, the gameplay of DMC is superior to Devil May Cry 2. Like I mentioned, they actually have a combo system. You can properly... There is a skill ceiling. Like, you can actually combo stuff and use different weapons, and it feels nice, and there's a flow to it, which is helpful. It makes the game actually fun. But what prevents it from going any higher is the absolutely dog trash story. Like I mentioned, Dante is way too edgy and way too punk. All the characters fall flat, and they feel like they have no importance. And the subtlety is non-existent. The game feels so dated. Like, even a year after it came out, the game feels dated, because it's essentially a criticism of, like, it's essentially a corporate criticism and a like call to rebel sort of thing, where you can stand out and you can be different, and that makes you unique and blah blah blah. The story we've heard a million times. But the way it's presented is just so bad. It's so bad. It drags any goodness that could be out of the game down so hard. And it just does not feel good. It really doesn't. If someone asked me to play DMC again, I would probably be very, very unwilling, because I just cannot get through the story, man. If you ask me to like riff on it, yeah, I could definitely do that. That's fun. But man, so much wasted. It's just so wasted. It's such a disappointment. It was so bad to where they made a DLC for it featuring Virgil, which, pardon my French, but everyone likes to call him fuckboy Virgil, because it's not really Virgil. It's this pompous jerk off who flips his script right at the end of the game and says, "Yeah, I'm evil now," you know, because it's Virgil, and we all knew it was coming, but it just didn't feel earned. But they gave him a DLC where he tries his best to like figure out what he's gonna do after his defeat by Dante, and he ends up like saying, "You know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna become the Demon Lord." And then it just ends because they canceled any sequels because the reception was so poor. So it just stops there, and that's the end of it. Man, what a shame. What a shame DMC is. It really sucks. Still better than DMC 2, just because DMC 2's gameplay is so trash. But it's gonna go at number 5. Good gameplay, horrible story. The story drags it so many points down. All right. So the next one in slot number 4, which is the last. I'd say it's the last bad game. I won't say it's bad, but it's definitely mid. Is DMC 4. Devil May Cry 4 came after, obviously, because it's numbered. It came after 1, 2, and 3. And it was the first game where they really tried to spice things up and add some difference to it. It's the first game, and really the only game, because we'll get to Devil May Cry 5, and Devil May Cry 5 is unique for a couple of reasons, but Devil May Cry 4 is focused almost entirely on Nero instead of Dante and his personal growth. We of course have Dante back in his mocking, joking, hee hee ha ha form. Thankfully voiced by Ruben Langdon after 3, so we're good there. But a lot of it is focused on Nero. And Nero is a unique character because he is almost the exact antithesis of what Dante is. Dante is very cool and not cool and collected, but he is brash, but he holds himself to a very non-serious, non-committal standard where when he engages in fights, it's all like playing a game to him. Whereas Nero is very aggressive. Nero has this level of edge to him that just it's completely different from what Dante could be. He's very brash, he's very emotional, and his entire story is run by his relationship with his love interest, Kyrie. She is his driving force, and that's what carries him along. We'll get more into Nero later because he's more relevant in Devil May Cry 5 than he is in Devil May Cry 4, even though it's his first appearance. But the thing with Devil May Cry 4 is it has a very solid gameplay loop. It's got a nice amount of skill. There are some really unique enemy types, and the combat is very well designed. The difference between Nero and Dante is very well described, and their gameplay loops are completely different, and it's very fun to play as both characters. In fact, there are 2 points in the game where you play as Nero and fight Dante, which is a really fun fight. The first time is at the very beginning, and the second time is halfway through. And at the halfway point, a lot of people, that's where they really start to struggle, because Dante's second fight is actually really difficult because he uses a lot of his kit on you, and you have to adapt accordingly. Yeah, all in all, like, Devil May Cry 4, if it's the first game you've ever played, Devil May Cry 4 is good. It is still a very good character action game, and it does a lot of things right. The story's really fun. The cutscenes are all memorable, and they have a lot of memes attached to them. A lot of the banter between the characters is well done. A lot of the characters are well done. Probably one of my favorite characters in the series, and one of my favorite boss designs is Credo. And he's the only character who you don't fight twice. Getting to that, the reason why Devil May Cry 4 is probably considered to be mid is, while the gameplay is good, and while the story is good, and while the characters are well written, there are 2 things that sort of drag it down. The main thing that drags the game down is, as I mentioned, you play as both Dante and Nero. You play as Nero first, and then you play as Dante. The problem is, you play as Nero for 14 chapters. 14 chapters straight, all Nero. You learn how his mechanics work, you learn what Fortuna is like, which is the place the game is set in, and you develop and you grow as you go along. At mission 14, Nero is incapacitated, and we swap over to Dante. And when we play as Dante, I think it was because the game was rushed, but you end up playing practically every mission that you just played as Nero backwards again. And you fight all the same bosses again. So to beat the game once, you play through it twice. And not only that, the final boss is terrible. Not the final boss, but Sanctus, the statue. Sanctus is the priest. Names. The Savior. The Savior is a bad boss. It's a bad boss, and it sucks because it comes right at the end of the game, and it just, like, it feels blech. It's just not fun. So that's what sort of knocks it down a lot. Like, the story carries it and keeps it good, and the cutscenes are fantastic, but nobody wants to play the same game twice in one run unless you're crazy or you're planning on doing, like, a New Game Plus sort of deal, which, at that point, you've made the decision to play the game again. The worst part about that is you're forced into it. Like, you cannot beat the game unless you kill all the same bosses twice, and they're good bosses. They're really cool bosses, but you have to do everything twice, and it's filler. It's padding. It adds too much to a game that could have been fine if it didn't cut corners and added more content. But I'm pretty sure the development on DMC4 was rushed, and that's the entire reason why it ended up in the state that it's in. The second reason why a lot of people don't like DMC4 is, weirdly enough, Nero. He gets better in Devil May Cry 5, but a lot of people don't like him in DMC4 because he's a bit of a whiner. He has a tendency to whine and moan and complain about a lot of stuff, and his brashness is slightly off-putting from what people expect from a main character. On top of that, at the time when Devil May Cry 4 came out, people were expecting to have a good sequel to Devil May Cry 3 featuring Dante. And what ended up happening was, in the advertisement for Devil May Cry 4, they advertised Nero, and everyone was like, "This isn't Dante? What are you people doing? Are you trying to, like, soft reboot?" This was before DMC Devil May Cry. are you people trying to soft reboot the series? What's going on? Why is there no Dante? And everyone got angry and blah-de-blah-de-blah, general backlash. So it already started off on kind of a bad foot. And then people didn't like Nero because he was a generic, emotional anime protagonist with his anime hair and, you know. But his design is really cool. His design in DMC 4 is actually really cool. Like, his Devil Bringer, his right hand is really cool. His sword is awesome. His double-barreled hand cannon, I believe it's the Rose. I think that's what it's called. I might have the name wrong. But all that is really well designed, and it gives him a lot of uniqueness that allows him to stand out from Dante. Thankfully, as I said, Dante's in the game, and Dante's a playable character, and it's the first time that you get to experience all of his different styles for free. Like, you could use the directional pad to pick all of his different styles, and you get to like differentiate between all of his different abilities and like mix in sword and gun combos and all of his weapons and etc. The skill ceiling on Dante's gameplay in Devil May Cry 4 is really high in 4. So when you play as Dante, the game really becomes an exercise in how well can you combo. It really does. But at that point, you've already played through the game the one time. Like, you played through all of the areas once before. So while you now have a super powerful Dante with his own unique abilities, you're playing through the entire game again. So it loses a lot of impact that it would have had if it had stayed just the single playthrough. The nice thing about Devil May Cry 4 is, while it is somewhat mediocre, a lot of what makes it good is carried over into its sequel, which we will get to. And Nero stays around. Nero in 4, like I said, is not as liked as he is in 5. But he still is a cornerstone and is an important character to Devil May Cry 4 and to the series as a whole. I'm not spoiling why he's special, but it is, for people who have played the series, it's pretty clear why he's special. But he adds a surprising amount to a game that would otherwise be, you know, kind of blasé. And for me personally, I actually really like Devil May Cry 4. It does get boring playing through the same missions twice, and there are a couple parts in the game that are, you know, kind of obnoxious. But for what it offers, it, I think, actually does a really good job. So it's gonna go at number 4, which is the playing the same game twice tier, because that, trust me, if it wasn't the same game twice and it was unique all the way through, it would probably be over what number 3 is, because for what it lacks in originality, it makes up for in polish, and that is actually really important, especially to character action games. Everything feels really nice and everything flows together. So that is Devil May Cry 4. Next up, on the number 3 spot, this is when we get into games that are genuinely good from start to finish. There are far less flaws, and it works out really well where you enjoy the game all the way to the end. There are, of course, you know, there are weak parts. Every game has weak parts. But for what it's worth, every game past this point is quality. So the first one, before we get to the top 2, is the original Devil May Cry. The very first one, the one that started it all, the accident, for lack of a better word. The story behind the original Devil May Cry and why the series exists in the first place is Capcom was, at the time, trying to develop Resident Evil 4. Yes, that Resident Evil 4. And they had a very unique direction. They wanted it to be more of an action-oriented game instead of a, you know, follow the camera simulator, run away from enemy simulator, which Resident Evil 3 was. I have no issue with Resident Evil 3, but, you know, at the time, they wanted to spice things up. So, if I remember correctly, I'm not sure if Dante was supposed to be Leon, or if he was supposed to be his own character, like continuing off of the canon of Resident Evil. But partway through development, they decided to ditch the idea of making a Resident Evil game because it just wasn't aligning with the rest of the series. And they developed it into its own game. They made Dante into his own unique character. They gave him his own style, and they took away all of the Resident Evil elements and they just made it its own thing. And we got Devil May Cry. So, Devil May Cry is the very first game in the series. So, for most game series, it's very difficult to be top of your own list when you are the very first one, purely because you are the innovator and you are the trendsetter. So there are often small kinks and often bits of roughness that haven't polished off yet. And Devil May Cry 1 does have a lot of that. It's not a perfect game by any means, but it's very good and it still holds up even today. If you want to get introduced to the series, Devil May Cry 1 is a very good way of doing it. That's how pretty much everyone got introduced to the series. And it's still a good game. What it does right is the setting, the characters, and the combat. So it is set on Malay Island, which is this very remote island with a massive, almost like cathedral-like castle on it that the entire game is set in. And it is a great piece of set design. It is gothic. It has multiple layers. There's a million things to do in it, and it just is awesome. It gives you a good set piece. But it's a wonder to run through Malay Island and see everything it has to offer, and experience, because it was the first true proper character action game. Like this was before pretty much anything. It really was one of its its own thing at the time. The characters. So this is where we properly got introduced to Dante, the wacky woohoo pizza man himself. At the time, this Dante was a little bit more serious and a little bit more taciturn, but he was still his goofy mocking self. And while he seems a little out of character now in Devil May Cry 1, it was the first time that we were seeing him, so he had so much sass. He had so much sass for a lead character in Devil May Cry 1. Comparing it is like the teacher from Ferris Bueller now with the level of sass that modern Dante has. But for the time, he was really entertaining. He was really, really fun to play. All of the cutscenes are well done, and all of his interactions are well done, especially his interactions with Trish, who is an important character as well. And it's just, it was the first time we got to see Cool McCool Man doing Cool McCool Man things. So you can't take that away from Devil May Cry 1. It was the first of its kind. I'm gonna keep saying that because that's true. It was the first of its kind. It did a lot of things. Speaking of the first of its kind, the gameplay. Devil May Cry 1 is very, very bare bones compared to its sequels. It has a lot of fun combat details, don't get me wrong, but it was, obviously, it was them figuring out how to do a proper system for combos and weapon swapping and all these different things. So we didn't have Dante's multiple styles. We had a limited selection of weapons. We still have a lot of weapons in Devil May Cry 1, but it's more limited. And combo swapping isn't as fluid, but still has some greatness to it. Movement is nice. Enemy density is nice. Enemy designs are cool. And everything does work out. There are a couple parts, combat-wise, that are a little annoying, like the stupid skulls. I hate the skulls. I think that they're obnoxious. And there are a couple levels that feel like they're built to be obstacles. But as it stands, the combat is very solid. I wouldn't say the skill ceiling is as high as some of the other games in the series. I wouldn't even say the skill ceiling's as high as like Devil May Cry 4, for instance, because there's so many more things in the kit in 4 than there are in 1. But you can't blame the game for coming first, because it did come first. It also, obviously, sets up the world. So props to that, because there are a bunch of things in Devil May Cry that we're introduced to for the very first time, and we had never seen before. And it adds a lot of It adds a lot of, exposition to the whole thing. So just for, coming first, it deserves some kudos, and it really belongs where it does. Devil May Cry was, I believe, the first game I ever played. My brother introduced it to me when I was pretty young, and it was the first time that I had played anything like that, and it was a really fun experience. It just has this unique charm to it that makes it stand out from pretty much any other game. Pretty much any other game. It really is unique. Like I said at the beginning of stream, a game that's very similar to the Devil May Cry series is Bayonetta, and they're very often intertwined because they are very similar, and they have the same idea of character action, and both characters are sassy as all get out. But Devil May Cry hits a bit closer to home for me. I've played Bayonetta. I really like Bayonetta, but for me at least, I appreciate Devil May Cry. And it's the series I grew up with, so I'll always have that passion for it. But yeah, to close the book on this one, Devil May Cry belongs at the number 3 spot because it is very solid and still holds up even now. If you have not played Devil May Cry, I'd say this is the best game to start with, and honestly from there, skip 2 and then play either 3 or 5. You'll lose a bit of the story nuance if you play 5, but if you go from 1 to 3, that is really good. You can skip 2. 2 doesn't really tell you as much as 1 and 3 do. But as it stands, I personally think that the original Devil May Cry is a very good game and belongs where it belongs. Okay, so we have 2 more. These last 2, which are Devil May Cry and Devil May Cry 5 and Devil May Cry 3, are very interchangeable depending on who you ask, because both games are very good, and both games do a lot of things absolutely fantastically. I'm going to talk about both of them very in depth because both games belong to be where they belong, in my personal opinion. If your opinion is different, I'm very happy for you, and I'm glad that you enjoy the games in a different way that I do, because again, video games are subjective. But as it stands, you can maybe guess where I'm going to put each one based on their group titles, but it might be a little hard. So, to rip the Band-Aid off and place each one where they're going to go, in the number 2 slot is Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5, to me, is what every other game in the series does, polished and perfected to a level that is so beyond that it's unreal how well everything fits together. It is, as we know right now, the final game in the series, and it ties together a lot of loose ends, and essentially acts as a culmination of everything. It acts as the capstone to the entire series. It really does. It brings everything together and ties it together in a nice little neat bow. The interesting thing about Devil May Cry 5 is it is the newest in the series, and it comes after a very long gap in games. I'm not counting DMC because that was made by a different studio, but Devil May Cry 5 comes after if I remember correctly, I think 10-year gap, something like that, something crazy like that, between 4 and 5. So people were clamoring for a sequel to Devil May Cry 4, and when it was announced, everyone was massively excited. When the trailer dropped, everyone went crazy for it, and everyone was super hyped for it, and honestly, I think the hype was deserved. Devil May Cry 5 is the epitome of character action games. It does so many things right, and there's very little wrong with it, to be honest. I'll get into a couple of the flaws because there are some. It's not perfect. But Devil May Cry 5 is such a quality game that any flaws that there might be are really just nitpicks. It does its job so well. And Not to say that Devil May Cry 1 isn't a great game on its own, but the gap in quality between Devil May Cry 1 and Devil May Cry 5 is miles beyond. It really is. So in Devil May Cry 5, we are in Redgrave City, and we're dealing with the Qliphotha tree, which is this massive evil demon tree filled with baddies and killing all the people. So our job is to take down the tree and, you know, Devil May Cry things. You're fighting demons, you're doing cool character action stuff, and it's the first game to feature three playable characters instead of 2. Nero comes back from 4, and of course, Dante, the master himself, is still there. But we also have V, and V is unique because instead of having weapons and guns, he controls minions to do his bidding, and it's the first like fight for me sort of style that we have seen, and it's really interesting. It really is, because it's totally different from its predecessors in the way that V plays. The story of Devil May Cry 5 is awesome. It is so well written, and all the characters that it adds, like Nico and V, obviously, are well written, are very well written. All the characters it brings back, Lady, Trish, Nero, etc., fit into the story really well, have a solid amount of impact, and really complement the main characters, which are Dante, Nero, and V, obviously. Devil May Cry 5 is also probably the best game to have an alternate Virgil mode. Devil May Cry 3 and 4 also have Virgil as a playable character, but in 5, he has such a crazy kit. I'll get into the kits more, but I think Virgil in 5 is the best of all 3. The theme that's playing right now is actually Virgil's theme because I think he's a really cool character. Dante is my personal favorite, but Virgil is also really awesome. And because of how awesome Virgil is, and because of how important he is to Devil May Cry 5, the internet absolutely loves Virgil in Devil May Cry 5. Like, obviously the Bury the Light memes, the Judgment Cut End memes, everything surrounding that is just so fun and so awesome. But the main draw as to why Devil May Cry 5 is the quality monolith that it is because it is so crazy when it comes to the combat. It is on another level when it comes to the combat. It is absurd. Like, for Devil May Cry 4, the skill ceiling is pretty high because you can mix together a lot of different stuff, especially with Dante. For Devil May Cry 5, the skill ceiling is literally infinite. It is absurd how much you can do in Devil May Cry 5. There are people who play Devil May Cry 5, which, remind you, is a single-player game. There are people who play it to this day just to improve their combos and their ability to switch between weapons. And like, seriously, if you're someone who likes fighting game combos and hack and slash combos and getting crazy high scores on doing different things and swapping between weapons and like turning your controller into essentially a button mash machine, like the crazy claw grip of hitting every single button at once to do a massive combo, Devil May Cry 5 is the game for you. It is absolutely nuts when it comes to the combat. Dante's multiple styles complement all his weapons fantastically. All the new weapons he get are really fun and hilarious, especially the motorcycle. He uses a motorcycle as a combat option. It is absolutely absurd. It is so crazy. But that, like, seriously. And Nero, for how semi-basic his kit is, I mean, he still has a really good kit in 4, but it's much more subdued than Dante's. His kit expands so massively in 5 with the different busters, with the different devil breakers, rather. I think they're called devil breakers. Yeah, one of them is called Buster. I got confused on that one, and it's Devil Bringer in 4. My bad. But his kit goes so hard in 5. Like, it's comparable to Dante and Virgil's kit, and even V's kit. V's kit is probably the most basic because he's essentially like a tower defense simulator. But everybody does absolutely insane things with their weapons and their abilities. There's so much to do in 5. That's the main draw of 5, in my personal opinion, is how insane the combo system really is. And the style and the polish and how everything looks and how everything sounds, and it's just every game on this list is enjoyable to some degree, but 5 is practically a masterpiece in just how well it puts everything together, and it just feels good. It just feels good to play. And honestly, for any video game, that's the main point. When 5 came out, I didn't play it immediately, but I played it after the fact, and I've beaten it twice. Honestly, it's actually pretty damn hard. It's actually a pretty damn hard game, especially near the end. And there is a lot to learn with 5. The skill ceiling is infinitely high, but the skill floor is actually pretty high too. Where you can't really just spam one thing and win the game. You actually have to try to adapt and figure things out. It's almost like Doom Eternal in a way, you know? Where Doom 2016 had a really solid skill ceiling where you had to pay attention to your weapons and fight demons and such. But Doom Eternal's skill ceiling is really high, and is actually really high skill floor as well, because you need to be able to combo stuff and mix things together and adapt to combat. It's tricky. It really is. But yeah, Devil May Cry 5 does a lot of things right and very few things wrong. What it does do wrong is there's a couple bosses that are kind of mediocre, and there's some weapons and combos that are kind of blasé. But it really is in a league of its own in terms of how well it puts everything together. It's kind of insane. And because of how well the gameplay is, how good the gameplay is, and how much you can combo into stuff, it belongs in the number 2 spot, the combo tier. Yeah. Devil May Cry 5. Absolutely wonderful. It really is. And with that, we come to the very last spot, which honestly, it was kind of a hard decision to make because of how good Devil May Cry 5 is. But as it stands, while Devil May Cry 5 is probably the most polished and has the highest skill ceiling and does the most right, I'd say quality-wise, in general, from start to finish, Devil May Cry 3 is the best game in the entire series. And there's a couple reasons as to why that is. So, to start off, Devil May Cry 3 came after 2, because, well, it's chronological, that makes sense. But people were like I said, people were very disappointed in 2. It's funny how this list, 2 is at the very bottom and 3 is at the very top. Just to give you some idea of the gap between 2 and 3. But 3 came after Devil May Cry 2, and the point of 3, at least I believe the point of 3, was to redeem, for Capcom to redeem themselves and make a game that people really wanted to play. And Devil May Cry 1 was a game people really wanted to play. Devil May Cry 2 was not. So having Devil May Cry 3 come after 2, it had a lot that it had to prove. And I think it went above and beyond with the quality. I think it really saved Devil May Cry from becoming another, meh sort of blech deal. It really defined what Devil May Cry is, in my opinion. So in Devil May Cry 3, it actually acts as a prequel to a lot of the series. It acts as a prequel to pretty much everything. Dante is at his youngest. Virgil is at his youngest. Everything set in the other games happens after 3. So, in essence, it's almost not a coming of age story, but a character development story. So, the thing with Devil May Cry 3 is you are playing Dante in his cocky, brash self for the first time. Like I said, the Dante in Devil May Cry 1 was a mocking, jovial, fun character, but he wasn't what he would end up being in the future games. Devil May Cry 3 is the first time that we see Dante being Dante, or at least what people think Dante is. And this is also the first time he's voiced by Ruben Langdon, I believe. I don't think he was voiced by Ruben Langdon on 1 or 2. But putting the voice with the character was genius, because I can't separate him from Dante anymore. Truly. And it just, like, his character in 3 is, like, one of the most important parts of the game, because he's really well written. He is amazingly well written in 3. He starts off as almost like a non-committal, like, this doesn't matter to me sort of guy. But by the end, he actually has a solid amount of growth and depth. And like I said, it's not quite a coming-of-age story, but you can sort of think of it that way. Because he develops. It's the first time that we see Dante, like, actually grow as a character proper. And it does a lot of stuff right with the storytelling. There are a lot of twists and turns. The characters that are introduced in 3, especially Virgil. This is the first time we see Virgil. The characters that are introduced in 3 have a massive impact on the series and are long-lasting and stay for a while. And the story is not perfect per se, but it's great. It's fantastic. If we move on to the setting, we're set in the Temminigru for most of the game. At the start of the game, we're in Dante's shop, and then we travel to the Temminigru, and then we enter it. The first boss of the game is Cerberus, which is where a lot of people dropped it because Cerberus was too hard. He's essentially what turns boys into men. He's a pretty aggressive boss. But the majority of the game is set in the Temminigru, which is this massive demonic tower with multiple tiers, filled with puzzles, filled to the brim with puzzles, filled to the brim with enemies, has a ton of really cool set pieces, has a ton of really cool bosses, and it's great to run around in, you know? It does a lot of things right when it comes to set pieces. But honestly, like, the set design isn't what makes the game stand out, because you could probably put Devil May Cry 3 in Devil May Cry 2's setting with the same characters and bosses and still have it work really well. But where the game really stands out and really comes into its own is the gameplay. It was the same with 5, and it's the same with 3. Devil May Cry 3 introduces us to the style system for the very first time in the series. So we get to swap between Gunslinger, Swordmaster, Trickster, and Royal Guard, which are Dante's 4 styles. Gun Trick Sword Guard, or Gun Trick Sword Royal, as people like to say in 4 and 5, because you can hot swap between them. But in 3, because this is the first time we're introduced to them, you have to go to what is it called? It's the statue that allows you to buy stuff and save your game. You have to go there, or you have to go into your menu. I forget off the top of my head. It's been a while since I played Devil May Cry 3. But you have to switch them manually. You can't just switch them on the fly. But what that lacks in fluidity, it makes up for in complexity. Being the first time that we see all those styles, you get to experience them, and the game sort of, it kind of throws them at you and says, here you go, here are some styles. Work with them, grow with them, see how they go. And while the combat isn't nearly as in-depth and as fleshed out as it is in 5, because 5 had a time to grow, for what it's worth, and for when it released, the combat in 3 is great. It flows so nicely. You can mix so many different things together. The introduction of the styles adds so much to the kit that was lacking in 1 and 2. Well, obviously it's lacking in 2 because you're literally just only using guns the entire time. But it's fantastic. And it sets Devil May Cry 3 apart from so many other games, just like Devil May Cry 5. That's why it's really hard to separate 3 from 5, because while 5 has a massive amount of polish, 3 was such an innovator for the series. And I personally think that the innovation is what makes it just barely edge out and like just barely be better than 5. I'd say if you play 3 and 5, both games are a fantastic romp the entire way through. The deal with 3 and why 3 can be a bit of a barrier to entry for people is it has a problem with its difficulty in the base game. In the original release, Dante's Awakening, they had a mistranslation of difficulty settings, where the Japanese hard ended up as the global or English normal. So the game by default was harder on the global release than it was on the Japanese release, which definitely prevented people from enjoying it as much. But a lot of people played that version, I myself included. A lot of people played the Devil May Cry 3 version that came out first, with that high difficulty ceiling. And the difficulty ceiling actually made people enjoy the game more. Like, there are some real hard asses in the gaming community. Trust me, anyone who plays Dark Souls and Elden Ring and even Sekiro would know. Games that are hard for the sake of being hard have their own degree of fun. And Devil May Cry 3 at the time was hard. Very hard. Very, very, very hard. Which is why, like I said, the first boss of the game, Cerberus, was a barrier to entry for a lot of people because of that difficulty spike. But when it was remastered, not remastered, when it was re-released and the difficulty was tuned and they added Virgil, the game gained a lot more fandom, and it gained a lot more spice because it was updated and they added a couple game mechanics and they added a bunch of game modes that would come back in future games like Bloody Palace and I think Son of Sparta and Dante Must Die. I think those were the first time that they appeared, unless they did appear in 1. I'd have to go back and check that. But yeah, while Devil May Cry 1 was the originator and was the origin for everything, and Devil May Cry 5 is the culmination of everything, Devil May Cry 3 is the true innovator. It is what added by far the most of the series. It's what characterized Dante, Virgil, Lady, and Arkham by far the most. It has wonderful set pieces. It has wonderful combat. There are obviously a couple parts that suck, like being inside of the dumb flying whale, and a couple bits inside Temini Group. But again, it's not perfect. None of the games on this list are perfect. I gushed a lot about 5, but even it too has flaws, like I said. You'd have to play to see where there are weak points. But again, after 4, which is the last of the games that really has more flaws that drag it down, 3, 5, and 1 all from start to finish are enjoyable. And to me, 3 stands out from its buddies by, you know, being its own thing. Like, I said that you should start with Devil May Cry 1, and I'd say you should. If you really want to get into the series, you should always start with the first game, unless it's bad, which Devil May Cry 1 is not bad. It's really good. But if you were to not play any other game in the series and just play one of them, Devil May Cry 3 is an open and shut case. You need to know nothing about any of the other games, and you can play through Devil May Cry 3 from start to finish and have absolutely no trouble figuring out what's going on, why things are happening, how the game works, how combat works, how to swap between weapons, where you're going, what the bosses are like, anything. And that's what makes it really awesome, is you don't have to play any other game. You can just play 1. You can just play 3. Sorry, I looked at the list where 3 is and I said 1. But you can just play 3. And it probably, out of all of them, has the second most replay value. 5 by far has the most replay value because of the infinite skill ceiling, like I said. But 3 adds so much on repeated playthroughs. Like, obviously, the first playthrough too is how you start to understand how the game works. And the second playthrough is you being able to use the skills that you developed over the course of the game to play it back on a higher difficulty if you choose, and have a good time with it. And it does so much. It does so much for itself. It's kind of insane. I'd say the difficulty of 3 is what makes it really fun. Truly, I really think so. I'm no expert when it comes to combo systems and character action games. I really am not. I just play the games to enjoy them. And I know that a lot of people, when it comes to, especially Devil May Cry, do not like it when people are not like crazy combo nuts. But you really, to be completely honest, you don't have to be a crazy combo nut to enjoy the game. You can treat it as a hack and slash, especially 3. You can treat it as a hack and slash and still have a very good time with it. The game will punish you for not innovating and not expanding your skill horizons. It will punish you. But for what it stands, you can still enjoy it, even as it is. Just, you know, just playing through it, just enjoying it and learning about it. While 5 has the most unique weapons and some really crazy stuff, and 4 throws a lot into the mix, I think 3 has the most iconic weapons in the series. Like Agni and Rudra, Artemis. There's a ton of Cerberus, the triple nunchaku. There's a ton of iconic weapons in 3. And on a personal level, I relate the most to Devil May Cry 3. It took me probably the longest to beat, but I played it probably 3 or 4 times. And I really, really like Devil May Cry 3. If you were to put 5 and 3 against each other in a vacuum and say, objectively, which game is probably better, it would be 5. But the game that I enjoyed more is 3. And at least to me, Devil May Cry 3 is, for the series, the greatest of all time. And it does everything right that an action game should. There's very little to it that isn't enjoyable to me. And I think while the entire series is good and you should play it, even 2, I'm serious, play 2, you'll see how bad it is and then see how much better every other game is. Devil May Cry 3 is the best in the series, and I think it deserves to be number 1. So with that said, that does it for the full list. I'm going to let the music continue. It'll probably shut off by the time I'm done talking. But yeah, that's the list. So number 6 is Devil May Cry 2. Number 5 is DMC Devil May Cry 5. And number DMC Devil May Cry, oopsie. And number 4 is Devil May Cry 4. Convenient. And number 3 is Devil May Cry 1. And number 2 is Devil May Cry 5. And number 1, the best game, Devil May Cry 3. So, that is me gushing about every single game in the series and giving you some insight onto like why they're all good and why they're fun. I hope this was enjoyable and I hope you learned something. And if you haven't played the Devil May Cry games, definitely go play them. They're a fun romp, and they're probably one of the most well-respected and well-loved character action games of all time. If you've played Bayonetta and not played Devil May Cry, play Devil May Cry. You will love Dante, trust me. He's a goofy, wacky pizza man who does so much and is just an enjoyable, lovable sack with some fantastic character. But that about does it. I have said my spiel on why I think Devil May Cry is good and how I feel about each of the games. And with that, the list is over. And I think everything goes in the place that I wanted it to be. So, that about does it. I wanted to at least get through the list. And I knew it was going to be a bit of a shorter stream, and I'm fine with that. I just wanted to talk about Devil May Cry 5. Not Devil May Cry 5, not just Devil May Cry 5. I almost said it again. It rolls off the tongue. But it's a great series. Go play it. I really like it. I might play it on stream at one point. Who knows? But that does it. So, for anyone who popped in during the stream, thank you so much for coming. For anyone who's watching the VOD, nice to see you as well. And I hope you learned something and enjoyed Devil May Cry. That about does it. For the last 2 streams of this week. I'm finally getting to BioShock 2, so I will be preparing for that and getting ready for that, and I hope you come see me then as well. But for now, that does it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.